I wanted to be that guy. But that guy was gone. That guy disappeared without a trace. And what lay in his path was this paranoid, delusional, hallucinatory, depressed, manic, panic-attacked young man. And nobody knew what to do with me. Everybody was in fear for my well-being, but nobody knew I was suicidal. And in September of the year 2000, I would attempt to take my life in a way that is now 98% fatal. 98% of those who jump off the Golden Gate Bridge never again get to tell their stories.
Welcome to the Mind Health 360 show. I'm Kirkland Newman, and if you or your loved ones suffer from mental health issues such as depression, anxiety, insomnia, poor memory, poor attention, mood swings, exhaustion, stress, etc., I interview the leading integrative mental health experts from around the world to help you understand the root causes of these symptoms, many of which may surprise you and suggest solutions to help you heal over the long term. If you want further information, please go to www.mindhealth360.com or find us on social media. I'm incredibly grateful that you are speaking to us here for the Mind Health 360 show.
Thank you.
And it's a really important topic, and it's a two-part series that I'm doing. So the first part was with Dr. James Greenblatt, who's an integrative psychiatrist for children and adolescents, and he specializes in suicide and eating disorders, ADHD, and also general psychiatric disorders. And I was talking to him earlier today about the biochemistry of, suicidality and what you can do to prevent it from a biochemical perspective. And then the second part, obviously, is with you. And I know that you have your own story, which is very compelling, and also your own approach to dealing with suicidality and helping those who are facing suicidality. So I just want to thank you for being here. And so what I think would be great would be obviously for you to tell your story. And I hate to ask you this because I know you've told it a million times. And I was going to ask you, do you ever get tired of telling this story?
I don't get tired of it. It's something that is an honor for me to do. When I have a bad mental health day and I have to tell my story, it is hard. But when I have a good mental health day and I tell my story, it's empowering and it's life affirming, and it's the most therapeutic thing I can do.
That's wonderful. And one of the things that really stuck with me here was their choice of method is the most important determinant of whether they live or die. That really resonated with me because my grandmother committed suicide when my mother was 15 years old. And she took poison and she regretted it. And my grandfather drove her to the hospital and she begged to be saved. And she said, "Do you think they can save me?" And they couldn't, so she died. But that tragedy in my own family has impacted, obviously, my mother and my own kids, myself, my kids. I had postpartum depression after the birth of both my boys, and I have a feeling that, a lot of that has to do with the ancestral trauma from my grandmother taking her own life. And also regretting it. And a lot of people, there's a very high suicide rate from guns in America. 60% of firearm deaths are caused by suicide, which is 10 times the number of deaths by firearms in Europe, for instance. And a very good friend of mine, her brother killed himself when he was 20 with a gun. And you jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge, and obviously I'll let you talk about this, but you regretted it instantly. And there are a lot of statistics that people who do survive suicide really regret what they've done. And to me, that's one of the most tragic things that one can hear. So part of this is about telling people before anything happens, it's a real gift that you've been able to experience that and come back and tell people almost from the future, essentially what you experienced. And so I'll now be quiet and let you tell your story and respond to that.
Well, my story goes back to the day I was born. I was born in poverty. I was born to biological parents who after they had me and my brother were on drugs and alcohol, and they both had manic depression, what we today call bipolar disorder. So I was genetically predisposed twice. And I dealt with in my infancy quite a bit of trauma alongside my infant brother. We were both abandoned and neglected on a regular basis by our birth parents while they went to do drugs or score drugs. And, one day, one seedy motel clerk, as I always say, made his most unseedy decision. He heard our screams and cries in his mind one too many times, and he called the police. And the police came in with Child Protective Services, and they placed us in foster care. And we bounced around from home to home. And the thought and the idea was that me and my brother would be adopted together. But of course, that's not what happened. We both got bronchitis, and he died. And then I developed a detachment disorder and abandonment issues that follow me until today. Every time somebody I love dies, I feel like they're leaving me on purpose, and I can't shake it. I bounced around from home to home. And unlike my poor brother, I got very lucky. Pat and Debbie Hines adopted me and made me their son. And I am a Hines. That's my mom and dad. And they really, truly saved my life. But it didn't stop there. Pat and Debbie Hines could have had natural born children, but they opted to take in 3 kids from 3 separate families into one, making this melting pot of a family. Me, I'm mixed race, part Black, part Arawak Indian, part Jamaican, part Scottish, Irish, and English, and other things. My brother's Black, my sister's white, my mom and dad are Irish and German, and people who saw us were very confused. We would go to restaurants that wouldn't allow us to eat there at night. We got up, we went somewhere else, and we ate somewhere else. We were happy. And that was, my infancy was traumatic. My childhood, my early adolescence was amazing. I really believed growing up that nothing can go south from here. I'm gonna grow up. I'm gonna get into that good school. I'm gonna get that great job my dad's always talking about. I really believed that everything was going to be okay because we had been afforded opportunity, unlike so many in this country, because of how hard Pat and Debbie worked. They worked very, very hard for what they gave us. They saved our lives. They worked really hard. My dad came from nothing. His parents had substance use disorder, alcoholism. They would die of liver failure, cirrhosis, very young ages, 49 and 54. And he would be left with about $17 in his pocket to make his way in the world. And he would go on to become one of the most prominent San Francisco bankers of his time, all through hard work. He paid his way through the end of high school, college, and beyond. And he made something of himself. Debbie was a nurse, 45-year nurse, just retired this year. She started off in the burn unit in the trauma center all those years ago. Very, very hard job, very tough gig. But she's had every job in nursing you can possibly imagine. And when they took me in at 9 months of age, I was violently ill all day, every day. I had a distended belly filled with liquid, a bruise from the top of my sternum to the bottom of my abdomen from being malnourished for so long. You see, my birth parents fed me what they could steal. Kool-Aid, Coca-Cola, and sour milk was my first diet.
Wow.
My gut to brain health, as you are very well aware of as a functional medicine doctor, my gut to brain health was very poor. I've been fed so many poorly nutritious foods, that I was very sick mentally from the very beginning. My infancy was fraught with my brain being completely jacked and rewired because of the food I was eating. If you can call it food, it wasn't really food. It was just processed nonsense. And that journey of my first food intake being really, really terrible would follow me in my food habits as I grew up and grew older. And I wouldn't learn about gut to brain health until just a couple of years ago, really, when the science was coming out. I would grow up, I would have a complete mental breakdown at 17 and a half years of age in front of 1,200 people. I would go see my psychiatrist. I would be put on meds, but I wasn't taking them adequately. I wasn't following a treatment plan. I was pretending to in front of everybody. I was lying to everybody to make them feel better, but I didn't want to believe that I was this flawed. I didn't want to believe that I had all these problems. I wanted to be the kid who was the WCAL wrestling champion, the kid whose football team, after he was on it, would go to state. The kid who was on the speech and debate team for 2 days before they kicked me off, but I was there, I wanted to be that guy. But that guy was gone. That guy disappeared without a trace. And what lay in his path was this paranoid, delusional, hallucinatory, depressed, manic, panic-attacked young man. And nobody knew what to do with me. Everybody was in fear for my well-being, but nobody knew I was suicidal. And in September of the year 2000, I would attempt to take my life in a way that is now 98% fatal. 98% of those who jump off the Golden Gate Bridge never again get to tell their stories. It used to be 99%. Now it's 98%. 39 individuals in 84 years have survived that fall. 26 remain alive today, and many have died of natural causes or old age. Of those 26, only 5 of us get the privilege to stand, walk, and run. They call us the most exclusive survivors club in the world. There's a book of the same name by Ben Sherwood. And I'm saying this to make a point. I get to be here. And I believe getting to be here is a privilege and a gift no matter the pain you're in. Pain is inevitable. It's coming for all of us if it hasn't already. But suffering, I believe, is optional. It's a choice. We're given this term by clinicians all over the world. When they see us for the first time, and this is how it was told to me. And I want to challenge this narrative because it really irks me. We're given this term. My first 3 psychiatrists told me I was suffering from bipolar disorder type 1 with psychotic features. I have heard countless individuals in my travels over 20 years doing suicide prevention work that say their clinician told them they were suffering from schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, delusions, eating disorders, etc. I want to challenge the narrative that we're suffering. If we are all suffering, that means we are the victims of our own story. But if we choose to let the pain build us brick by brick from the ground up until we are stronger than ever, then we can challenge that narrative and we can be the heroes of our own story as opposed to the victims. And I think it's just something to think about. You know, I told people I was suffering from bipolar disorder for years. I wrote about it. I blogged about it. I vlogged about it. And today I look at it much differently. I may have been born in pain, but I never suffered a day in my life. I've lived through it. I've dealt with it. I've battled it and I've fought it, but I'm not suffering. And I've been through hell. And I'll tell you, just 2 years ago, and you met me during part of this time, actually, I don't know if you know this, but 2 years ago, I developed second-degree burns from the bottom of my feet to the top of my head from a medication I was taking, from one of the older medications I was taking. But they didn't know which one it was at the time. And I was on 6 medications at the time. And I was on what's called the tipping point of Stevens-Johnson syndrome. And my insides were boiling outside of me. And it was the most pain I'd ever experienced in my entire life. It felt like knives and needles were coming from my bones through my skin across my entire body. I wanted to die every single day. I wanted to take my life. But I fought that pain in spite of it, despite it, to thrive today. And I was able to do that because I was self-aware with my diagnosis and my troubles. And the pain was so great. It lasted for 30 weeks, 24 hours a day.
Wow.
It was backbreaking. It would bring me to my knees, and there were times when I couldn't walk or I couldn't even speak. It messed with my brain. And during this entire period, they had to take me off my meds. When they first discovered I was on the tipping point of Stevens-Johnson syndrome, they took me off all of my meds in one 24-hour period without titrating down off any of them.
Wow.
I had a 48-hour hallucinatory withdrawal-based psychosis. So because I was withdrawing from the meds, I saw the answers to the universe. And I mean, if I described to you what I saw, it would blow your mind. For example, I saw 40 busts of Jesus in every different ethnicity you could imagine. I saw aliens, a green, a white, and a gray. I saw Aboriginals who discovered the earth. I saw the aliens that brought them. I mean, I saw Gandhi, Buddha, and the King of Bhutan. It was a wild experience. And then I saw, for the last 24 hours of it, I saw the Aurora Borealis in my room for 24 hours before it all passed. It was an experience.
Insane.
It was insane, for lack of a better term. Absolutely.
It's interesting because I've heard you in other podcasts describe what you went through, or, whether it's before you tried to kill yourself off the Golden Gate, or this experience with, this horrible skin disease, this reaction to the drugs, as, being in a lethal amount of pain. And that basically, people have suicidality because they cannot deal with this lethal amount of pain. And what I really hear from you is, the way to survive is to somehow develop some sort of resilience when faced with this lethal amount of pain.
not just resilience, but gratitude inside the pain. I have experienced lethal emotional pain on more times than I can count on all of my extremities. But it's never going to take my life because I have gratitude for that pain so I can survive it, so I can be resilient in it. And it's a tough concept for people to understand who are dealing with the same kind of pain, because they're like, I just want to be out of this. I can't deal with this. And everybody asks me, they say, Kevin, aren't suicidal people selfish?
Yes.
And the answer is absolutely not.
Yeah.
To be selfish, you have to know you're hurting other people.
100%.
The people that are dying by suicide, the people that are attempting suicide are not trying to hurt other people. They're trying to stop their own lethal emotional pain that is so overwhelming and overbearing and so mind-numbing and backbreaking that it is destroying them. They're not being selfish. They're just trying to free themselves from something that is completely destructive, and just the weight of on their shoulders is so great they can't bear it anymore. And that's what we have to teach people, is that no matter the weight that you bear, you can survive it if you just believe that you have the ability to fight it. And I think that it comes down to a matter of perspective. I used to believe that suicide was an option. Now, when I have suicidal thoughts, which I still have, the first thing I do is I say 4 simple but effective words to anyone surrounding me. I need help now. And if the first person I say that to is not willing to help me, I go to the next and the next and the next until someone is willing to empathize with my pain. And for 20 years, I have found someone to be there for me in my struggle, and I've stayed alive all those years. The first 3 psych ward stays I was in after my attempted suicide off the Golden Gate Bridge were involuntary, forced in against my will. Very tough situations, very stressful psych ward stays. I was beaten up in one of them. I stopped an assault in one of them. I experienced some horrible things. But the next 6 psych ward stays, I turned to my family and friends, mostly my wife and my father, and I said, I need to be in there or I won't be here. And I, in effect, saved my own life. And that's where we need to get our young and old people alike to when they're struggling this way.
I think that's a really important point. And I just circling back to this selfish thing, because one of my best friends is often suicidal. And he always says, I don't understand how people can say it's selfish. It's just so not selfish. It's, and one of the things, coming back also to my grandmother, she committed suicide on Mother's Day, and her daughter was 15 and her son was 18. And she truly believed that she was doing them a favor, because she felt that her life was such a burden to them, and her depression was such a burden, and her alcoholism was such a burden, that they would be better off without her. Yeah. And that, to me, is the tragedy, because your thinking is so warped. It's not a selfish act. In some ways, it's the ultimate sacrifice. Yeah. And in her case, I know that she truly believed that she was doing it for the good of others. And that, to me, is tragic. And that's what we have to get across to people is, and you're fantastic at giving this message, is that is not the case. People's lives are not better off with you dead. And
yeah, it's this self-delusional perceived burdensomeness that we all have when we're suicidal. And it's instinctual. It's not something that's paired to 1 or 2 people. It's something that is instinctual around the world, in every language in the world. It doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter what background you came from. If you are suicidal, you tend to believe that you're a burden to all of those around you. And it's a common belief, and it's instinctual. We have to start switching that narrative and saying, when we become suicidal, I am worthy, I am valued, I'm supposed to be here until my natural end. Suicide never has to be the solution to my problems. It is the problem. And switching to that narrative so that we can survive the pain.
100%. And that is completely the case. And in terms of you, and, I'm such an admirer of yours, because you tirelessly campaign, and you've started this amazing YouTube thing called The Art of Wellness. And I've been looking at that. And it's basically, how to help people, because you're very honest about the fact that you still have suicidal thoughts and you still struggle with mental health. And that essentially, the way you survive is daily work. And it's discipline and it's work and it's hard work.
Yeah.
And that really struck me, because it's not like, oh, well, you tried to commit suicide and it didn't work and you've had this sort of Damascene conversion and everything's fine. No, I mean, you have this ongoing daily struggle, which you manage and you deal with in your own particular way, which is, I think, could be incredibly helpful to others. So can you talk to us a little bit about that method that you've developed?
Absolutely. And first of all, I like to say, and just to point it out for a moment, you've said a few times committed suicide. I like to say died by suicide, just like you would die of any other organ diseased. If you think about liver, heart, lung, and kidney disease, now people die from them all the time, right? People die from brain disease like bipolar disorder, just like I almost did. And so we died by suicide. But nonetheless, the plan I put in place and the plan I created those YouTube videos for. So if you go to youtube.com/Kevin Hines and you go into the playlist section and you go into series, The Art of Wellness, you can see 12 videos, 10 steps to bettering your brain, mind, behavioral, mental, and spiritual and physical health and well-being over time. And people from as far as Peru, Africa, China, and Japan who've watched these videos have said they dramatically improved their mental health in 6 to 9 months. And they say this because when they follow a routine, it's a routine, it's a regimen. It's a 10-step regimen, 12 videos, 3 to 5 minutes each, easily digestible on how to better balance your brain health and change your life today by working through this regimen. And this is where it came from. In my third psych ward stay, I had what I call my epiphany and my gift. In my book, Cracked Not Broken, it's chapter 19 of the book called The Epiphany and the Gift. The epiphany came in the form of my Uncle George, who came to visit me in the hospital against visiting hours, got a special admit to come in, just me and him in the cafeteria. Nobody else was there. And he had a rolled up magazine in his hand. And he goes, Kevin, your family can help you until we are blue in the face. But until and when you take 100% responsibility, young man, for the fact that you have this disease and you fight it tooth and nail, kid, ain't nothing going to change. Is this what you want? You want to be in and out of these places for the rest of your life? And I said, no, Uncle George. He said, well, get it together. And he dropped this Time magazine on the table like a mic drop, and it rolled open. It was a 2004 Time magazine article on the cover that said how to battle bipolar disorder, depression, and mental illness with routine and regimen and win. And I'm looking at this thing and I'm going, you mean I could do these things and I could feel better? Why didn't my first 3 psychiatrists tell me that? And so it was all about the things I could do to balance my brain. And most of them were not clinical activities. The only clinical aspect of it was to take medication with 100% accuracy every day without fail at the same time every day, which I started doing. Everything else were common sense tools to better your brain health. So I went to my nurses and my case manager, and I started implementing all of these things into one regimen every day while in the psych ward. I was there for 2 months. I had the time to better my brain health. And so all these things started happening. I started exercising. I started losing weight. I was pre-diabetic, so I got rid of that. I started eating healthier foods, nutritious foods. I started feeling better mentally. I started to exercise every day, multiple times a day, and I was feeling great. I started to educate myself, reading about all things bipolar disorder, reading the book Bipolar for Dummies and loving someone with bipolar disorder, and then passing that book on to family and friends who needed to understand me better. All of these things started to get better for me. I started using coping mechanisms and strategies to better my brain health, like music therapy, art therapy, blue wave light box technology. So I'm doing all these things and things are going really, really well. So I get out of the psych ward after a month and a half later, and I implement these things into my daily activities, and my world is changing. And I'm feeling stronger and stronger. Yes, I'm still having the symptoms. Yes, I'm still having suicidal ideations. But because of my self-awareness, they will never take me. I'll never die on my hands because I know what I need to do to get back to a safer place from that point. You know, and it's been quite a journey. And that Art of Wellness series on that playlist is there for everyone to take. It's yours. It's free. take it. There's a PowerPoint that you can get that goes along with it on my website, kevinhinesstory.com. And if you implement it into your daily life, or you can train the trainer with it, it's for you. Please let it give you hope, but you've got to put in the hard work. And that's the biggest, I think, caveat I see with people who want to get mentally well, but don't want to put in the work. Or to be fair, are somewhat unable to put in the work. And I think that if we can get them to a place of levity where they're safe and they can put in the work, they can absolutely change their lives. And if they can't put in the work, we have to help encourage them to put in the work, because hard work is nothing good ever came without it. You can't get mentally well from insanity unless you are dedicated and driven with a regimen and a routine that is going to stabilize your mental instability.
I think that's true. And one of the things I try and do with Mindtel 360, which is my website, is to raise awareness about integrative mental health and functional medicine psychiatry. And, the whole theory behind integrative mental health and functional medicine psychiatry is that it's a 360-degree approach. So you have the biochemical imbalances, you have inflammation, hormone dysregulation, infections, you have toxicity, which causes inflammation, poor nutrition. There are all sorts of biochemical imbalances, which mean that your neurotransmitters, for instance, your serotonin or your dopamine are low, and your hormones are not supporting you. And so you talk about doing the work, but dopamine, for instance, which is your motivation neurotransmitter, will, if that's not working, you're not going to want to get out of bed in the morning.
No, yes.
And that's just a biochemical thing.
Yeah. You have to balance that out first in order to get back to the work in the first place.
Exactly. And, and then you have the whole psycho-spiritual part. So the childhood trauma and this chronic stress. And then you have lifestyle behavioral stuff like, how much you sleep and how you exercise. And so it's really about implementing a plan that looks at all these aspects. And that's what I love about your plan, is that you do look at the biochemistry and how you eat and how you exercise and how you sleep and how you meditate and manage your stress. And it does take a lot of work. And I think in the case of some people who are exhausted and who have low dopamine and have low motivation, that, we need to make sure that they have a community of friends and family and health practitioners who can help them implement this program and get back on sort of the wagon of work and make it work. And I think part of the problem is that our mainstream medical approaches don't always look at these things, and they sort of dole out medication and some therapy, but, they're missing a lot of the aspects of what it takes to do this full program, essentially.
Absolutely. When you think about it, you have primary care physicians that are just giving out medications without therapy. Like this is you can't do a half-pronged approach to mental health. You have to do a whole pronged approach. It has to be completely well-rounded, and gut to brain health and functional medicine is crucial for the mental well-being of any individual, period. So if that's not a part of your approach, you're not going to do as well if you just, take the meds, or if you just exercise. You really have to have the whole embodiment of the plan to stay stable. And now it's interesting. I've stayed very stable mentally over COVID because I'm still doing my routine. And it's the one thing that's changed is I've gained a bit of weight because I've been eating a little more poorly than usual, but I'm doing everything else on the plan to stabilize. So I'm still on an even keel. My plan is to go back to eating more healthy foods and more nutritious foods that better feed my gut to my brain health, so that I can feel optimally better than I am right now. And I noticed the shift. Once I start doing that, I noticed the massive shift in that. Right now, one of the things that's going on is I'm taking a medication that decreases all of the leptin in my system. Thus, I don't feel full at all, ever. So I'm constantly ravenously hungry. And it's a problem that many people with mental illness have, especially people with schizophrenia. And that's why we see so many schizophrenics that are morbidly obese, because they just feel like they have to eat constantly. And they're taking these medications that make you want to eat all the time. So you really have to get to a point where you're like, okay, I know my stomach is full, even though my brain wants me to eat more. And that's where I'm at right now, is that transition.
100%. And that's one of the downsides, one of the side effects of these drugs is that they can cause, whether it's low libido or increased appetite or less, more leptin resistance, where you're less aware that you're full. And this is super important. And, the other thing is that I don't know if you take supplements. I was having this conversation with Dr. Greenblatt, and we were talking about the importance of cholesterol, omega-3s, and vitamin Bs and vitamin D, and lithium being an incredibly important nutrient for the brain, and that people who have high suicidality have very low cholesterol, very low omega-3s, low Ds, low Bs, and low lithium.
And the problem is not everybody knows this. They don't know. They're unaware of these things. And thus, if they're unaware, how can they augment it so they can feel better?
Exactly. And I think that's one of the things that is so important, is to, get this message across that it really is a biochemical imbalance, and that, you have to address the biochemistry as well as the trauma, because the trauma is a huge issue. I mean, look at the trauma that you had in your background. And I was, one of also my pet peeves is that, for instance, in the UK, the national guidelines on treating mental health is, drugs and CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. Now, CBT is great, but it's not necessarily going to help people with suicidality. Trauma therapy is really important. Things like somatic experiencing. So Peter Levine's work, and Bessel van der Kolk and Stephen Porges, who work with the body and the nervous system on trauma. And I was going to ask you, do you ever have access to these types of therapies? Have you tried these for your own trauma, and have they helped if you have?
I'm not sure if this relates, but I've done neurofeedback therapy. I've done EMDR therapy. Mm-hmm. And both of those were trauma removing related, and they were very helpful. They certainly helped me. I'll tell you that much.
And they do. And I think somatic experiencing is also a very important one. And I think, if more people can be aware of these types of therapies, I think, it's super important. And so back to your story, because obviously, you just have this incredible story. And can you talk us through, there are a few key points in your story that are very poignant to me. One of them is the fact that you didn't want to die, essentially.
No.
And you wanted somebody to stop you. And so if you can talk us through what happened, that would be helpful.
Absolutely. I always say I never wanted to die. I believed I had to. And those are two categorically different things. The day I jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge, the moment my hands left the rail, it was an instantaneous regret for my actions, and this 100% recognition that I just made the greatest mistake of my life, and it was too late. I fell 220 feet, 25 stories at what I now understand is 90 miles an hour, close to the speed of terminal velocity. And I hit the water. I went down 70 feet. I opened my eyes, and I was alive, and I was drowning. I frantically swam to the surface using only my arms. I broke the surface, and I prayed, God, please save me. I don't want to die. I made a mistake on repeat, and I believe you heard me. A woman driving by in a red car saw me go over the rail, called her friend in the Coast Guard. And the reason the Coast Guard boat arrived to my position in the water before I would set in hypothermia and drown, a 3-minute window, was because of that woman's timely phone call. In the water before the Coast Guard boat arrived, I was going underwater. I couldn't stay above water. I couldn't stay afloat. I was going to drown. And I said to myself, this is it. This is where I die. I said, Kevin, you can't die here. If you die here, no one will ever know you didn't want to. No one will ever know you knew you made a mistake. And that's when something began to circle beneath me, something large and very slimy and very much alive. I remember thinking to myself, you've got to be kidding me. I didn't die jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge and a shark is going to eat me. It turns out it was no shark at all. I was on a television program where I said I thought there was a shark beneath me a year later, promoting a suicide prevention campaign in San Francisco. And I said I thought there was a shark beneath me in the water. And people wrote into the show from all over the world. And one man's letter stuck out above all the rest. He said, Kevin, I'm so very glad you're alive. I was standing less than 2 feet away from you when you jumped. Until this day, watching this show, no one would tell me whether you lived or died. It's haunted me this whole time. By the way, there was no shark like you mentioned on the show, but there was a sea lion, and the people above looking down believed it to be keeping your body afloat until the Coast Guard boat arrived behind you. Now that's my miracle. And this creature kept me afloat, took off, Coast Guard boat arrived. They fished me onto a flatboard. They put me in neck brace. They strapped me in from head to toe. And they started asking questions. The first, kid, do you know what you just did? I said, yeah, I just jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge. They said, why? I had no reasonable answer. I said, I don't know. I thought I had to die today. He said, son, do you understand how many people we pull out of these waters are already gone? I said, no, and I don't want to know. I would later learn that one of the officers, Marcus Butler, in his 4-year career at the Golden Gate Bridge, Coast Guard, he had pulled out 56 dead bodies from those waters and one live one, me.
Wow.
That's perspective right there enough for you. And I got to the hospital, and one of the foremost back surgeons on the West Coast opted to do my surgery. And he invented the surgery for me. Never been done before, never done again. And he went in through my left side, and he replaced my shattered vertebrae with titanium. I missed that day severing my spinal cord by 2 millimeters.
Wow.
And all these things were miraculous things that came into play to save my life. And I'll never forget when my dad came to see me. This is a man who played 20 years of hockey as the goalie with no mask, okay? He's the toughest SOB I know. He was like the drill sergeant who was never in the military, although his father was in the Battle of Midway as a naval officer. And my dad walks in the hospital room, and there I am in a bracing structure. I can't move. And waterfalls are just pouring from my dad's eyes. He's just crying his eyes out. And he says, Kevin, I'm sorry. And I said, no, Dad, I'm sorry. I said, Dad, I'm sorry. And he said, no, Kevin, I'm sorry. And he comes over to my left side, puts his hand on my forehead. And he says, Kevin, you're going to be okay. I promise. They had given him a 50-50 chance I'd live through the night. He just was trying to give me some hope. And I grabbed onto that promise. I held it tight to my chest. And I fought for that promise. My dad stayed with me in that hospital for 4 weeks. And I remember vividly when the nurses came in and said, Mr. Hines, visiting hours are over. You have to leave. And he goes, I'm not going anywhere. Get me a cot. They said, no, you don't understand, sir. We don't allow parents to stay after visiting hours. You have to go home now. There's nothing more you can do. And he said, get me a cot. And then they brought in 2 steroidal looking orderlies that come in the door, and they barely fit in the door at the same time. And like, Mr. Hines, we're going to have to ask you to leave, and they're all getting tough on him. And he says, okay, here's the deal. I'm a 3rd-degree black belt in judo. You can do one of 2 things right now. You can get me a cot, or you can get me a cot. And they got him a little bed to sleep in. And he was there with me for the first 4 weeks of me being in that hospital. And he didn't leave. He didn't shower. He didn't shave. He would get maybe a shirt to change into from somebody else. But he stayed with me. And when I was sleeping, which was most of the time because I was healing, is he would just hold my hand in his in that cot until he would fall asleep inevitably. When my mom came in the first day, she is the most optimistic woman on the face of the planet. And that's what I love about my mom, Debbie, is that her optimism knows no bounds. And it's part of why I'm so optimistic in the face of pain. And she comes in and she goes, I guess God wanted you to win that Oscar. I said, Mom, I've done high school and college theater. That's never going to happen, but thank you. But she said, I'm just so glad you made it, but my brother had a different experience. He walks in and he goes, how could you do this to us? We love you. I hate you. He was 13 at the time. I broke his heart. And he doesn't even remember this reaction. He has no recollection of this, but I have witnesses. Our relationship isn't the same even today. It's not what it was.
He's still angry?
I don't know if he's still angry, but I think we've, he lives with his mom in California. I live out here in Georgia. We don't see each other often, and there's just not much connection. And that's something that we need to fix. It's something it's possible to fix it. And I think I'm going to work on it. It's just something that, we've both let fall by the wayside. But I think that I think I affected him in such a way when I jumped that it just shattered his vision of me. That's how I see it. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's how I see it. And I hope to reconcile with him soon.
I mean, that's the thing. I think, what's really interesting is the impact that this has on everybody else. And that's, your documentary called The Ripple Effect is well named because, each one person's attempted suicide has a huge impact on thousands of people. And there's a sense when you try to attempt suicide that, no one cares or nobody, that it doesn't matter. But I think one of the key messages is that it matters deeply to so many people.
Yeah.
And I think, that's how does one get people to understand that their lives matter so deeply to so many people? And, when they feel so alone and that their life is not worth anything or is not significant for others, how would you deal with that?
Well, the first thing I would say is every suicide's ripple effect is incalculable. For every one suicide, there are at the very least 115 people directly affected. That's directly affected. Then you go secondarily affected, tertiarily affected, et cetera, and beyond. Every suicide has a ripple effect that is endless because, sometimes you have to think about it generationally. If I'm a father of two and they're 12 and 4, and I die by suicide, and they don't know about it until they're 14 and 10, then they're devastated again. Then someday they tell their kids tell their kids, and it just goes on and on forever. Completely. This hurt and this pain from this one suicide. Your grandmother passed away by suicide. You know this. Yeah. And it goes on forever. It's experienced forever. The ancestral trauma, the generational trauma occurs, and it can be recurringly and repeatedly devastating to more people.
Yeah, completely.
If we can help people who are suicidal understand that their lives truly matter, not just say it matters, but help them understand how much it matters, why it matters, how it matters. That's where we need to get to.
Agreed. And I think, that leads me to sort of what is the key message that you would give to a number of different people? So, 1, the person who's suicidal. 2, the general population who doesn't necessarily understand. 3, those who've lost loved ones to suicide. 4, those who are caring for people who are suicidal. 5, for parents who are worried about their kids, because I know that suicide is a huge epidemic now in younger and younger children, and it's a huge worry for parents. So I know I've thrown a lot at you, but
let's take those one at a time. So the first would be those who are suicidal, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So for those who are suicidal right now, I would say stop, take a breath, in through the nose 4 seconds, out, pursed lips like a whistle, but no sound through your mouth for 8 seconds. Do that 30 times. Don't move. Stay exactly where you are. Maybe even sit down. Take those breaths. Bring your mind and body to a complete calm. Number 2, call anyone who you know cares for you or is willing to help you and tell them your truth and say, I need help now. And this is why. I'm suicidal. I'm having these thoughts and feelings, and I need your help. Call people until you find someone willing to be on the phone with you and care for you. 3, if no one's available, text the crisis text line, CNQR to 741-741, or the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline here in America, 1-800-273-8255, +1 for military. If you're international, go on your phone to suicide.org and find the lifeline that's closest to you. Number 3, stay exactly where you are and don't enact on those suicidal thinking. Just stop moving. Number 4, I want you to, once you get the help from someone, I want you to be accepting of that help and understand that suicide never has to be the solution to your problem. It is, in fact, the problem. You are valued. You are worthy. You matter. Your pain is worthy of my time and others. Your pain matters simply because you do. I want you to think of all the children who never made it past the womb. Miscarriages. 30% of every first pregnancy ends in miscarriage. My wife, Margaret, and I know that pain all too well. Our boy, Jack Ryan, lived 8 weeks and no more. But he wasn't intended to be here in physical form. You all are, for the simple fact I'm looking at you through this lens. I know you're supposed to be here. So please stay and fight to be here tomorrow and every day after that. And let's go to the second group of people.
So the second group of people, and just coming back to that first group of people, one of the things I love with what you say is that basically your thoughts do not have to become actions.
Right. Your thoughts don't have to become your actions. Your thoughts don't have to own, rule, and define what you say next or what you do next. And thus, when you're suicidal, you don't have to act on that suicidal thinking. You can act on helping yourself stay alive.
Exactly. And then the second one is the general population. A lot of people don't understand suicide. And one of the things that struck me is when you were walking to the rail of the Golden Gate Bridge, you were praying for somebody to say something to you and to say, "Are you okay?" And you had made a pact with yourself that if somebody had stopped you and said, "Are you okay?" you would have told them, "No, I'm not." And you wouldn't have jumped off the bridge.
Right.
And there's a sort of sense of callousness amongst the general population, maybe because we're not aware or because we don't understand or because we're not sensitive to what's going on. So what would be your message to that population?
I think next to the callousness, there's also a fear of someone's reaction if you try to help them when they're mentally unwell. I was on that bus crying like a baby and nobody stopped me. Nobody said, "Are you okay?" No one said, "There's something wrong." No one said, "Can I help you?" Those were the things I wanted to hear. And I was going to tell that person who said that everything and beg them to save me. I couldn't tell my father that morning because I wasn't yet ambivalent, but here I was on this bus, ambivalent as all hell, wishing, hoping, and praying that one person would stop me, and nobody did. And so this is a pact that many people make who are suicidal. It's also instinctual, like we talked about the other aspect. And it's that if one person says or does this, I will. If one person says or does this, I won't die today. And it's very, very common. And so if we can see someone in active lethal emotional pain, why not be the person that says, "Hey, are you okay, buddy? Can I help you?" It's a very simple concept, but one a lot of people are very fearful of because they got their own lives, they got their own business to take care of. Nothing is more important than the lives of our brothers and sisters and individuals. We are our brothers and sisters and individuals' keepers. We are here for one another. Our sole purpose in this existence is to give back to those we know, those we love, those we don't know from Adam, and those we don't even like. What we are not here to do is damage each other and hurt each other with our words and our actions.
100%. I agree. Third group is, what would you say to those who have lost loved ones to suicide?
For those who have lost loved ones to suicide, and I've lost 9 people that I love to suicide that I really cared about. 9 people is 9 people too many. I often find that people who've lost loved ones to suicide are plagued with the question, why? My advice to you is this: stop asking the question why. It is an unanswerable question. Begin to ask the question how? How do I look to the living and find ways to move forward? I didn't say move on. I don't think you can move on from a suicide. I think it's impossible. But you can look to those who still remain with you, those who still remain alive, and move forward through the pain.
Understood. And then for those who are caring for people who have mental health issues and who have suicidality, that's incredibly stressful because you're always worried about your loved ones. You're worried about what they might do. What would be your advice to them?
So to those of you who are caring for and being the caregivers for loved ones who are suicidal or who are having depression or mental illness, I would say, remember that they're not trying to hurt you. Remember that they are in lethal emotional pain quite a bit of the time, and that you want to treat them as people first and the patients they are second. Think about them and the struggles they go through. And even though it's very difficult for you, imagine how it is in their brains, because they're the ones firsthand dealing with it, their psychosis, their depressions, their mental struggles. It's sadly not to be difficult with you, but it's not about you.
Yeah.
And if you can understand that, you can tolerate it and deal with it properly.
Totally. I think that makes total sense. And then I think, the other category is parents who are worried about their kids. There's an epidemic of suicidality and mental health issues amongst kids. What would you advise parents who have teenagers or young kids? How would you advise them to approach this epidemic? Should we talk to our children? Should we preempt it?
So the conversation about suicide should be a conversation you are having at the dinner table and the breakfast table on a regular basis. It should be, because it is so prevalent among teens, you should be having this conversation on a regular basis. Now we're seeing 5, 6, 7-year-olds dying by suicide. I think that we need to open up the doorway to the conversation in a bold and honest way that is non-sensationalistic, that is educational and important. Make it entertaining for them. Go to one of my videos on YouTube. The video, It Was an Instant Regret, is a prime example of something that's helping a lot of kids. Watch the video with your kids and then have a direct conversation about what you saw in the video. It's a very well-made video, won several awards on how to survive suicidal ideation, and it's meant for teens. Go to my website, kevinhinesstory.com/resources, and go to the Parent's Guide to Teen Suicide. It's very helpful. It's one of the most heavily downloaded in the field. Use it, take it, it's yours, it's free. Here are some real concrete examples of what you can do to have the conversation with your kids and to get them to be honest about their pain. So you can keep them safe, so you can keep them alive.
Absolutely. Okay, that's fantastic. And my final group was just yourself, you, Kevin Hines. I mean, I know that you're very honest about struggling with suicidal thoughts. What do you tell yourself in order to keep moving forward?
My self-talk is one of the most crucial parts of my well-being. I look in the mirror and I say, I love you, Kevin. You're the greatest. You can do this. You're a good man. You've got this. Suicide is not an option. Talk about your pain. Talk about your struggles. Be honest about it, because a pain shared is a pain halved. And I do that everywhere I go because it's something that keeps me safe and sane. My self-talk, when it gets negative, I have to reverse it immediately. And then I have to take action, physical action to stabilize. So that might be dropping down and doing 50 push-ups just to feel a little better, just to release some endorphins. Might be going for a run. Might be getting outside and going for a walk with my wife. It's all about figuring out the best course of action that is the most positive for yourself and your mental well-being. Oftentimes, it's just sitting down and talking to my wife and telling her my truth and telling her how I'm feeling. And then she follows that up with how much she loves me and how much I matter to her. And it brings me right out of that painful moment.
Yeah, which is so important. I mean, having a support network and connecting is so important. And I think one final question, I'm not going to keep you very long because you've already been incredibly generous with your time, but do you think that our society and culture at the moment are making things worse? I mean, do you think that, for instance, kids who are they've got this technology, they've got social media, there's a sort of normalization of suicide in shows like 13 Reasons, on Netflix. And, there's a sort of culture of suicidality and mental health issues and sort of dysfunction in what our teens and our kids are exposed to that we were never exposed to. And do you think, what can we do about this? Is this an exaggeration to say that our society is a more fostering environment at the moment for suicide than it ever has been before because it's so mediatized and because of social media? Is that an exaggeration? And what can we do about this?
It's not an exaggeration. We are in the place we are in because of society's viewpoint on suicide. We are in a place where the show 13 Reasons Why is okay to put out without any recourse. They should have never shown the severity of the attempt to 13-year-old kids. It was a causative factor in girls all over the country attempting in the same way.
Yeah.
Look, Netflix has a bottom line: to entertain and to make money from entertainment. And that was one of those popular shows that I ever put out. So they did their job, but they did it without care for what it could possibly cause and who could possibly be affected by that show. There were also individuals whose lives they claimed were saved by the show. So there was a contradictory effect. But we live in a society now, if you've seen the film The Social Dilemma, that social media and this idea that comparison is the absolute answer to your problems. Comparison is the thief of joy. And kids are seeing these social media feeds with these, influencers that are doing so well and so amazing. All you see is this highlight reel of amazing efforts and behaviors and how cool you are, and how different behaviors are validated and approved and flamed upon. So to be more promiscuous or more pervasive. And I think that we need to limit our children's time on social media. I think that we're far too connected to these things.
Yes.
And our actual connection to human beings is falling to the wayside. It used to be that you would have a conversation with your parents and your grandparents, and you'd be in the same room with everyone, and you'd learn the wisdom from the grandparents and the wisdom from the parents, and you would be safe as a kid. Well, today, kids are just sitting on these playing video games that are dangerous, looking at videos that are inappropriate, making videos themselves on TikTok that should not be made. You know, when you have a 12-year-old girl dancing on TikTok and somehow that's okay, it's mind-boggling to me how that is out there in the world and not stopped. It makes no sense to me. The sexualization of our young tweens and teens, it disgusts me to no end. And how that is okay baffles my mind. It's not okay. It shouldn't be allowed. It needs to be shut down. And these kids are feeding off the likes and views from these platforms. And when they don't get the views they want, they're depressed because the views release dopamine and serotonin and affect their ability to function. You know, when you get a dopamine hit from a like and view, you also get a drop in your serotonin from a dislike and a hateful message. So it's absolutely affecting their brains, which is affecting their decision making. Their brains aren't fully developed. They're not 25 years of age. And so they're making decisions based upon faulty information, and they're attempting suicide at an alarming rate, which is mind-boggling. The rate of young girl suicides has risen so much, and there's an absolute correlation to comparison on social media.
Yeah, I mean, there's a very interesting, I did an interview with Robert Lustig, Professor Lustig, and Dr. Don Grant, who are both sort of experts in tech addiction and addiction. And we were talking about the dopamine pathways and the serotonin pathways. And also the fact that in 2011, this is when Snapchat and Instagram came on the scene. And essentially, that's when there was also a correlated real peak in mental health issues with young people.
Yep.
And to me, it's really a huge worry because, you know, they're the first real generation, and we don't know how this is going to play out over the long term.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I think that's my sort of final question in terms of, you know, what are we doing? What are the governments doing? What is mainstream medical practice doing? And what can they do more of? And I'm thinking sort of gun control, social media control, junk food and sugar legislation, because we know that junk food and sugar is incredibly inflammatory to the brain.
But sugar is a class 3 poison. You have, you know, arsenic and cyanide, which will kill you immediately. You have a poison that comes from snake venom or spiders that could kill you, but you could get cured from. And then you have a class 3 poison like sugar, refined sugar, gluten, and dairy, which are all poisons to your system. And they affect your brain, and they affect your brain's ability to think, to coordinate, to function, and they really should be regulated. The world would be in upheaval if they were regulated, but it needs to happen because people need to eat better so they can feel better.
100%. And I think that's one of the challenges is, you know, we know that neuroinflammation, which is brought on by junk food and sugar and lack of sleep, you know, essentially neuroinflammation is incredibly damaging, and also stress, chronic stress, and even social media over the long term. If you're constantly on your social media, you know, it's designed to generate sort of chronic stress in your system, and it's definitely inflammatory. So, you know, should governments be regulating these things? And if, you know, is that the way of the future? Short of governments regulating these things, I guess people like you and we have to keep trying to educate people so that they can take this into their own hands and do it themselves, essentially.
I'm not one thinking that government should regulate the food. I think that we should be teaching as many human beings as possible about functional medicine and food as medicine. And I think we should be educating the masses about that. I'm sitting here looking at one of my favorite books by Dr. Will Cole, The Inflammation Spectrum. It's a fantastic book, and you can take a test in this book to see how inflamed your system is and how you can reverse that inflammation and turn it all around. As a matter of fact, my cousin Kelly Levesque has a quote on the back that says, Dr. Will Cole is the go-to expert for all things functional medicine for my clients' health problems. The inflammation spectrum makes it easy to find which foods work best for your body. This is grace-based eating at its best. And I think that it's pertinent to the well-being of every human being on this globe to learn how to do this. But then you have to think about the areas in each country where people just don't have the ability to purchase this food because it's so expensive.
100%.
There's a big disparity amongst Black and Brown and BIPOC communities that don't have the ability to purchase these foods because they don't have the money to do so. And so there's an unequal health disparity amongst people that can afford these types of foods and those that can't. And that's a problem. We need to make it more affordable to eat these kinds of foods on a regular basis. At the idea that you go to Whole Foods and it's as expensive as it is ridiculous. It's a markup because they know that type of clientele will pay that much money to eat that food, but they need to make it available for every human being on the planet.
I 100% agree with you. And I think that's one of the biggest issues is that processed food is cheaper than whole foods. Cheaper
and it's easier. Yeah. And it's tied to violence. It's tied to aggression. It's tied to anger and irritability and all types of things like this. So you need to, if we really want to make these changes, there's going to have to be some legislation that makes things moves the needle in the right direction. But there's also going to have to be a massive wave of education. And there's going to have to be some people that sell these foods that drop their prices.
100% agree with you. It's a whole societal issue.
Yeah.
Well, Kevin, you're amazing. And you're one of the most inspirational, wonderful, wise, lovely people I think I've ever met. And I'm really grateful for you and for the work that you do. And, before we close, is there anything that you would like to add that we haven't mentioned for people who are suffering? Or, we've covered a lot, but
I would say to all of you going through the pain, remember that it wasn't always like this. And with hard work, it won't always be like this. You can get better. You will get better. Put in the work, put in the effort, and change your life. Yeah. I believe in you. I know you can do this. You've got this. Be here tomorrow.
I love that. And I love Be Here Tomorrow. And in fact, you sell these wonderful T-shirts called, with Be Here Tomorrow. And I wanted to get one for the podcast so that I could wear it, but I'm going to order it. And I think I'll title the podcast Be Here Tomorrow because I love that. And it's wonderful. A really beautiful message.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kevin. Thank you for your time and thank you for everything and keep up your wonderful work. And I'm deeply grateful, as I'm sure many, 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 many thousands of us are.
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening to the Mind Health 360 show. I hope that we've helped you realize that your mental health symptoms have root causes that can and need to be addressed in order to sustainably heal, and have given you some ideas about steps you may take to start your healing journey. Please share this interview with anyone you think may find it helpful, and if you want further information, please go to www.mindhealth360.com or check us out on social media. This information is for educational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease or to replace medical advice. Please always consult your healthcare practitioner before discontinuing any medication or implementing any changes in your diet, lifestyle, or supplement program. Thank you.